I'm Father Stephen Riley, sitting in my back garden here in St Columbkills in Rutherglen. It's such a beautiful sunny day, seems very fitting for the season of Eastertide. And today is the fourth Sunday of Eastertide, which is also known as Good Shepherd Sunday. That's because all of the readings based on the Gospel of today are about Jesus, who calls himself the Good Shepherd and describes what that means. In this little series, I'm looking at some different works of art which are relevant to the season of Eastertide. And today I want to look at what is reckoned to be the oldest ever depiction of Jesus. It's from the Catacombs of St Priscilla in Rome. They're on the Via Salaria, which is in the north of the city. And down in the catacombs, in one of the chapels, is this beautiful picture of Jesus the Good Shepherd. As we look at it, we can just contemplate exactly what we see in front of our eyes. It's clearly painted on the ceiling of somewhere. In fact, it's a chapel in which some people are buried and where Mass could have taken place. Right in the centre, we see Jesus himself, and he's pictured as being a young man. He's dressed in Roman robes and a toga. I wonder why that might be. We might reflect upon that as well. He has a sheep on his shoulders, reflecting the picture painted in the Gospel of Luke of Jesus who brings back the lost sheep. He's also feeding two other sheep who are either side of him. There are also two trees, and on those trees there are two doves, one which has an olive branch in its mouth. So maybe we're starting to already see some of the symbolism, some of it might be familiar to us. But the first question I want to ask really is, why might this have been the first image ever chosen by Christians to depict Jesus? Of all of the possible images which they could have taken from the Gospels and from the rest of the New Testament, why this one? Well, I think it demonstrates particularly how important this title was and how revered and venerated Jesus was known under that title of the Good Shepherd. And we'll speak a bit about that later on. But first of all, we might speculate on some other possible reasons why the Good Shepherd may have been chosen. One is because we're so early on in the history of the Church, probably in the 4th century, then perhaps a particular Christian form of art hadn't developed yet, and so it was just borrowed from the general surrounding culture. And these pictures of shepherds, of young men and young women, and people who are going about their daily tasks and business, particularly shepherds, were quite common in the Greek and the Roman world. And so it may be partly to do with that. It was just picking up a kind of a native tradition, an indigenous tradition of art, of painting, and using it in this setting. Another reason, though, might be that, as we know, in those centuries of the Church was persecuted heavily. Christians were persecuted. There were 10 different major persecutions under different emperors in the first couple of centuries of the Church, up until the Edict of Milan in the year 313, beginning with the persecution of the Christians by the Emperor Nero after the Great Fire of Rome in the year 64. So within that period, Christians wanted to pretty much keep their religion secret and hidden away for fear of persecution. And so choosing something like the Good Shepherd means that for those who were Christians, when they saw that imagery, they knew that it was Jesus who was being referred to. But if another person who wasn't Christian saw that, they would just think it was a picture of a shepherd. And so it was a way of both promoting and concealing through art the faith in Jesus Christ and protecting all of those who are Christians. And in fact, it means that in the catacombs we see lots of these secret symbols. One of them we see on the top right of the picture, which is the dove with the olive branch in its beak, which of course we would recognise as being a reference to the aftermath of the flood, when Noah sends out the dove, and when it doesn't return, then we know that the waters have receded and that the peace has come back to the world. But before that, the dove brings back the olive branch, which with the rainbow is a symbol of peace. Other symbols which Christians used are really fascinating, and some of them we might be familiar with. Probably the most famous one is the fish, and we still see that sometimes on bumper stickers of cars, for example. That was a symbol because the Greek word for fish is ichthus, and that each of those letters could stand for a different word, a kind of an acrostic, which would again be a sort of secret symbol for Christians. It stands for Jesus Christos Theou Huios Soter, which means Jesus Christ, Son of God and Saviour. So looking at that as a Christian, you would say, oh, that's the Christian symbol of Jesus, who is Son of God and Saviour. Whereas if you were not a Christian, then you wouldn't recognise it at all and wouldn't presume that Christians had made that symbol, or that this was a Christian house, or this was a Christian burial ground. Others also revolve around letters. There's the famous Chi-Rho, which looks in our letters, Latin letters, like PX, but in fact in Greek is CHR. So what looks like an X is the chi, which is a CH, and what looks like an R is a P in Greek. So it's actually CHR, which are the first letters of Christ, Christos. Another is the Alpha and the Omega, which we see often in the Paschal candle, for example. And that, of course, is a reference to the book of Revelation, where Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, I am the first and the last. And maybe a final one we could look at is the anchor, which we see very often in the early graffiti and painting of the catacombs. And the anchor is the symbol of salvation, something solid, something which gives us hope and solidity in a world which is passing and a world which is changing. So perhaps it's within that kind of context that Jesus is painted in a way which is recognisable to Christians, but where others might not recognise him, and therefore the true identity of the people who painted it can be concealed. But nonetheless, it does put front and centre this image of the Good Shepherd, the one who feeds his sheep, as we see Jesus who is feeding those sheep with both right and left hand in this painting. Also the one who brings back the one who is lost. Jesus is the one who leads us into safety. He brings us into the sheepfold and leads us out again. He is the gate who keeps us safe and stops the brigands and the wolves from coming in. He takes us out to pasture, and he brings us in again and promises us life in abundance. So on this fourth Sunday of Easter, in light of what we have seen, that beautiful picture, then we can have the same hope which animated the early Christians, to paint a picture of Jesus the Good Shepherd, the one who promises salvation, who promises rich pastures, who gives life and life to the full, is a promise for us in this life but also in the next. And it's the source of hope and promise for those who have gone before us, marked with the sign of faith.